Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Well, happy birthday, Crossroads. Eleven and a half years ago, our senior pastor at the time, John Fitzgerald, Ben's dad, walked into my office, which was right there when I was youth director, and said, "Hey, Vern, what if we started a new worship gathering? What if we started a new worship gathering with the hopes that we might be able to connect with people that we're not already connected with as a church, but not just for the purpose of bringing them here? What if we did that in the hopes that we could then help them connect with Jesus and find in him life?" And I said, "John, that is an enormous what if question." But I'm
in the spring 2008, Vern Collins, the youth pastor of Boone United Methodist Church at the time, invited me to lunch at Black Cat Burrito. As a freshman in college, I never declined a free lunch. And so at lunch, he asked if I would be interested in leading music for a new service at Boone UMC. I quickly agreed.
And so that began the process of gathering people who might have the same heart and the same desire to see God use this church to connect with people that we're not already connected to in hopes that they might connect with the hope of Jesus. Gather those people together, and we began praying, and we began dreaming, and just like there was no limit to what we were asking God to do, and we were willing to follow wherever God would lead. And so at the end of August, 10 years ago, we had our first Sunday, our first Crossroads. And we had a lot of folks here, and I'd say 90% of them were people who were here from our other two services. You know, well, probably from our 8:45 service, not the folks from 11 o'clock, because they were in our 11 o'clock service. But they came, and I don't know if it was like one of those things where they just wanted to say, you know, like, hey, did we come to watch a train wreck? Like, is this going to be, you know, really, really exciting because it's so bad? Or you know, what are we in store for? We had no idea what we were in store for. Saying yes to that what-if question, I didn't know it at the time, would reshape my understanding of ministry and the call that God had on my life. And it would actually reshape us as a church. And we didn't know that. But we were willing to answer this what-if. And I think so often that's what, when we look at the ministry of Jesus and when we look at those early followers of Jesus and what they would go on to do after Jesus' death and resurrection and the gift of the Holy Spirit, and we see the church born. So often when Jesus interacted with people, that's really what he was saying, was just posing this, hey, what if your life was this instead of this? You know, he would meet someone who needed healing, or meet someone who had been caught in sin, and he would deal with them with compassion, not negating their sin, but forgiving it, and then saying, now go and live a new life. What if the shape of your life could look different than it does now? And so out of that hope and out of that dream and out of that what-if question, Crossroads was born. And we chose the name Crossroads.
I ended up leading music for Crossroads for the next 4 years. And in that time, hundreds of new people joined the church family. 11 years later, the service is still going strong. The growth and the energy that Crossroads brought to Boone UMC cannot be overstated. I've been able to carry that experience with me in my recent transition to conference staff. This coming January, the Church Development Office is hosting a training for churches that are interested in starting a new service. I sat down with Dan Pezet, Director of Church Development, and my boss to talk about why a church would want to start a new worship service. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Luke. I'm happy to be here.
Could you tell us about your role at the conference and how you came to be a church developer?
Sure. So I'm the Director of Church Development for the Western North Carolina Conference. And basically what I tell people that means is that I have a responsibility and duty, a charge, if you would, to go across the conference and help to start new worshiping communities and to help strengthen our existing communities, which is an all encompassing job. It sounds really big. It is really big. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the best jobs in the world to be a support person, a person that can help churches think through, strategize on how to fulfill whatever it is God's called them to fulfill. So I have a really big responsibility here in the conference. I love doing it. I love helping churches. I've always been that person. I've been the person that likes to be in the back of the worship service, that if the fire alarm goes off, I like to figure out how to uh, just solve whatever that is going on, make sure, check it out, see if there needs to be an evacuation or something. That's how I started when I was a teenager, being that support person. And then out of college, I had the opportunity to work with Gulf Breeze United Methodist Church as they were launching a new site. So they were becoming a multi-site church. That was a really big thing back there in the early 2000s. And we launched a new site. I got to be a part of that, helping with programming. And we had 2,000 different people come through our new site in our first year. And it was just amazing. It was a wonderful time of ministry. Things were going so well. I didn't realize that what we were doing was cutting edge and something new in the country. I just knew that I was doing whatever was on my heart that Jesus had called me to do. And all of a sudden, churches around the country started calling me up and asking me to come and visit and tell them how we were doing what we were doing. And I realized that this is an actual opportunity to fulfill my calling, to help other churches to live into whatever God's calling them to do. And then I learned about developers and the developer roles and the conferences across the United Methodist Church. And I had an opportunity to do that in Alabama West Florida Conference. And now having that same opportunity here in Western North Carolina has just been a wonderful way to fulfill what I'm called to do. And so I enjoy going around and helping churches think about ways to start new faith communities and ways to go wherever God's calling them to go next.
That's awesome. Well, we're really glad to have you in the conference. And today we're focusing on how churches can launch a new worship service. And so I'd love to ask you a few questions about that. The first question that I have is, why should a church start a new worship service?
That's a great question. And of course, I can go right back to our mission statement as the United Methodist Church to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And if we're doing that, we should be growing and we should be at places where we can start new worshiping communities. So that's one part of the answer. Another part of the answer is that churches all across our denomination and in our conference have come to a place where if you're a healthy church, you are adding members. So you might have a membership class that has 8 people that will join the church after it's finished. You might see 1 or 2 people join per month. That's adding members as you go. When you add a new worship service, you change from adding people to multiplying. And it fits more in what I read in the Bible of how the early church started in Acts, where people were added to the church in great numbers day by day, house to house, community by community. It is exciting. It is what I believe church health is all about. And so adding a worship service is an easy way for churches to make that shift from adding people to actually living into that really fun, loving atmosphere of the church in Acts, where you were multiplying.
So when is the church ready to start a new worship service?
For years and years and years, church consultants have said, if your worship service is 80% full, it's time to launch a new worship service. There's been some recent studies that have been done that have challenged that, wondering if that's really true, because that's been one of these little sayings that consultants have been handing down for years. What they discovered was that it is true. 80% full is time to launch a new worship service. And in fact, you should actually begin launching your next worship service as your current worship service grows to 57% full. Because At that point, you're having momentum. That service will continue to grow, and you can start to build a new worshiping community at the same time. And so the truth is, many of our churches have waited too long to think about launching a new worship service.
That's fascinating. In January, we're hosting Jim Griffith for a workshop on launching new services. Why do we need a workshop for this? Can't a church just go out and launch a service?
Some churches can launch a new worship service just fine, and they've done that, and they do a good job. However, launching a new worship service is much different than continuing a worship service that you've inherited or making changes to a current worship service. It is very similar to planting a new church because you're planting a new faith community. It's just that you already have the space and the worship atmosphere, and you know what, you have a little bit more in place than what you would if you were planting a church from scratch. So when you launch a new worship service, the truth is they don't really teach that in seminary. I didn't take that course. And so I learned it, thank goodness, on the kind of on the job training with some people who knew what they were doing. And there's some books on the subject and helped us through. There are just a lot of different things to think about when you're launching a new worship service. So that's why we're putting together this workshop and offering that for our churches, because when you don't have someone from the outside that helps you think through some things, what I've seen happen is that a church will launch a new worship service only for their own people that they already have and that they're already in connection with. And when that happens, it will often fall flat. It won't have the growth and that joy that comes along with the Acts 2 kind of growth in the church. And it doesn't live into what it could be, which would be an evangelism tool to reach new people and create space so that more people in your community will have a place to connect to the love of Christ.
How can folks find out more information about this workshop?
Well, you can visit the conference website at wnccumc.org/launching worship. That's wnccumc.org/launching worship. And you can register for the workshop there. We actually have 2 different days we're offering the workshop, same material on both days. The first one is January 7th at Wesley Memorial UMC in High Point. And the second one is January 9th at Biltmore UMC in Asheville.
Great. And what can an attendee expect to learn at this workshop?
Yeah, this workshop will be a thinking partner to help you think through what the steps are in launching a worship service. How many months out should you prepare? What does it look like to invite your community to be a part of that? What kind of launch team would you need to help make it successful? What kind of leadership in a new community of faith that you're building, even when you're building that within a church? It's really multiple worshiping communities in one church. And so all of those things are things that we'll think through during this workshop. Jim Griffith is going to be the consultant, the coach that we're bringing in. Jim has been coaching churches for 20 years all across the country and has launched worship services in so many cities. I just am amazed at his work. He is a very respected church consultant, and he is my personal coach. I always learn something when I talk with Jim, and he is a great thought partner for anyone who's going through a process like this.
Well, as we wrap up our time together, I wonder what's one of your favorite stories of launching a new worship service, either from your time as a planter or as a developer?
I love it when a worship service launches that catches the context of the community in ways that we have not done before. My favorite was when we took over a bar in Pensacola, Florida, on Pensacola Beach, and started worship on the water, which was just a mile or so from our main campus. And we invited people to come. What was so fun was when people started bringing their boats and tying off their boats to come to church. That was really a mark where we said, we are reaching the community. We have found a context where people can come to worship that is unique to where we are. And whenever I see a church service launch like that, or a worship site launch in a way that meets the context of the community and joins the two, the gospel with the community context. I just am amazed and just feel really fulfilled when that happens.
Well, thanks, Dan, for taking time today to tell us about launching new worship services and about the events coming up. And grateful for the work that you're doing in our conference.
Thanks. It is a joy. It's joyful work, and I'm enjoying getting to know the conference and going around and seeing how God is at work. God is truly at work here in the Western North Carolina Conference.
The centerpiece of what happens.
Awesome. Thanks.
And we had no idea what we were doing. And sometimes I wonder if we do, yet. But this willingness to say yes to a what if question. To be a part of a church that is willing to take risks and ask what if questions. And friends, we just as a church celebrated 150 years last fall. Yeah, right. For a mainline denominational church, that is incredibly rare. But this is a church that's willing to take risks, willing to say, just because these are the things that we did that got us to this point, it doesn't mean that those are the things that we continue to do. And it doesn't mean that we don't look for new things that God is doing and seek to join God where God is moving. And so over the course of 10 years, yes, we've all grown up a little bit. Yes, the room looks different. Finally, I caved to the idea of standing on a platform and having lights, so people could see. It wasn't just that we grew up. It's that God has used this little gathering to change us as a church.
When I remember my time at Crossroads, the image that comes to my mind is a photo I snapped from the back of the gym one Sunday morning. Pastor Vern and Sam, one of our oldest members at Boone UMC, are standing in the back of the room. Each have an arm around the other as they worship. While some church members grumbled about starting a new service, Sam, a World War II vet, would pop into the beginning of the service every Sunday with a smile, a handshake, and a story to share. Sam never grumbled about the church changing. He was excited to see new faces in the church he loved. He understood well that the good news of Christ was meant to be shared.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCC UMC. That's WNCC UMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Gojo Studios.